Commander Jun Park stood at the viewport of the Terran vessel Harmony watching the stars drift by. His heart beat faster as the massive Xilarian flagship came into view, its dark metal hull gleaming like polished obsidian. After years of careful messages and delicate negotiations, humans would finally meet the galaxy's most feared predator species face to face. "Nervous?" asked Captain Han, joining him at the window. "Would you believe me if I said no?" Jun smiled, adjusting the collar of his dress uniform. "Not for a second." Han clasped Jun's shoulder. "The whole Earth Council is watching this mission. The Xilarians control half the trade routes in this sector. An alliance with them would change everything for humanity." Jun nodded. "And if we fail, we might find ourselves on their hunting grounds instead." The stories about Xilarians were legendary. A species evolved from apex predators, they had maintained their hunting culture even as they developed faster than light travel. Other alien races spoke of them in hushed tones, describing their speed, strength, and ruthless efficiency. "The shuttle is ready, Commander," announced the ship's eye. "The Xilarian delegation will receive you in 20 minutes. Jun took a deep breath and headed to the shuttle bay with his small team. Dr. Jin, their xenobiologist, and Minji, their security specialist. As Earth's lead diplomat, the success of this first contact rested squarely on his shoulders. The shuttle ride was silent, tension filling the small craft as it approached the massive Xilarian vessel. When they docked, Jun led his team through the airlock into a vast, dimly lit chamber. The air felt warmer and denser than Earth standard, carrying unfamiliar scents that reminded Jun of forests after rain. "Welcome to the Predator's Dawn *" came a deep voice. 5 Xilarians stepped forward from the shadows. Jun had seen images, but they didn't capture the reality. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, their bodies were covered in fine scales that shifted color slightly as they moved, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Their faces were vaguely reptilian, but with expressive features, their eyes large and vertical pupilled like a cat's. The central figure stepped forward. "I am High Commander Da. We have been curious about humans since your ships first entered our territory." Jun bowed slightly. "Commander Jun Park of Earth, we are honored by this opportunity for friendship between our peoples." As the formal introductions continued, Jun noticed one Xilarian watching him with particular intensity. Unlike the others in military dress, she wore fitted armor adorned with symbols he didn't recognize. A ceremonial blade hung at her side, its handle inlaid with what looked like bones. Catching his glance, High Commander Day gestured toward her. "This is Neri, Royal Huntress of the Xilarian Empire, and my most trusted advisor. Her presence honors your delegation." Neri stepped forward, her movements fluid like water. "I have studied your species, Commander Park. Humans have spread quickly through the stars for ones with such fragile forms." There was something in her tone that Jun couldn't quite read. Curiosity mixed with something else. Challenge, perhaps. "We compensate for our physical limitations with adaptability and cooperation," Jun replied carefully. "So I have observed." Nari tilted her head. "Yet you still maintain predatory instincts. Interesting contradiction." Before Jun could respond, Commander Day invited them to a formal dinner prepared for the occasion. The Xilarians led them through corridors lined with what appeared to be trophies from hunts, not just weapons but preserved specimens from dozens of worlds. The dining hall was magnificent, with high ceilings and walls displaying ancient hunting scenes. The Xilarians had gone to great lengths to prepare food safe for human consumption, alongside their own native dishes. As they ate, Jun noticed Nari watching him from across the table. When their eyes met, she didn't look away. "You seem to have caught our Royal Huntress's interest," whispered Dr. Jin beside him. "That could be good or bad." After dinner, Commander Dai proposed a ceremonial exchange of gifts, a Xilarian tradition to mark first meetings between potential allies. "We present you with this," Day said, as another Xilarian brought forward an ornate box. Inside was a blade similar to Nari's but smaller, clearly made for human hands. Its handle was wrapped in a material Jun didn't recognize, with intricate carvings along the blade. "This is a hunter's honor blade," explained Da, "traditionally given to those we consider worthy of respect." Jun bowed deeply. Earth is honored by such a significant gift. He reached into his own case and removed a crystal sphere. Inside it, a perfect miniature of Earth rotated slowly, showing continents, oceans, and weather patterns in real time, connected to actual data from home. "A world sphere," Jun said, presenting it to Da, "so that you may always see Earth as we see it, no matter how far apart our worlds may be." The Xilarians murmured appreciatively at the craftsmanship. Da passed the sphere to Nari, who studied it with evident fascination. "Now," said Da, "tradition requires that our gifts be acknowledged through blood." Jun felt his team tense beside him. "A simple ceremony," Da continued, noting their reaction. "We each make a small cut with the gifted blade, mixing blood with its essence. It bonds the blade to its new owner." Jun nodded cautiously. "We are prepared to honor your traditions." Day demonstrated first, running the earth-made blade they had brought as a gift across his palm, leaving a thin line of dark purple blood. He then handed the hunter's blade to Jun. The blade was impossibly sharp. As Jun pressed it against his thumb, it sliced before he applied pressure. A single drop of crimson blood fell to the polished floor before he could react. The effect was instant and shocking. Nari, who had been standing calmly with the earth sphere, suddenly went rigid. Her pupils dilated completely, her scales shifting to a deep crimson around her neck and face. She inhaled sharply, her gaze fixed on the drop of blood on the floor. The other Xilarians seemed confused by her reaction. Da stepped toward her with concern. "Huntress." Nari seemed unable to respond, her breathing becoming irregular. She took a step toward Jun, then stopped herself with visible effort. Her hand gripped the ceremonial blade at her side so tightly that her knuckles paled. "Excuse me," she finally managed, her voice strained. I need air." Without further explanation, she thrust the earth sphere into another Xilarian's hands and strode rapidly from the room, leaving the confused silence behind her. Da looked troubled. "Most unusual. Royal Huntress Neri has faced the most dangerous predators in the galaxy without flinching." "Is it something I did?" Jun asked, pressing a cloth to his small cut. "No," Da replied, but his expression suggested uncertainty. "Please, let us continue. I'm sure the Huntress will rejoin us shortly." But Neri did not return for the remainder of the evening, and Jun couldn't shake the image of her face when his blood had fallen. The look hadn't been one of disgust or anger, but something far more complex and unsettling. Something that looked remarkably like hunger. Neri locked the door to her private chamber and leaned against it, breathing hard. Her heart raced in her chest, and her scales had turned a deep crimson, the color of intense emotion among her kind. She had never lost control like this, not in all her years as Royal Huntress. "What is happening to me?" she whispered to the empty room. The scent of the human's blood still lingered in her senses, calling to something deep and primal within her. But it wasn't the familiar hunting instinct that had guided her people for countless generations. This was something entirely different, a pull, an attraction that made no logical sense. She crossed to her washing basin and splashed cold water on her face, trying to clear her head. The water dripped from her scales as she stared at her reflection. Her pupils were still dilated, making her eyes look almost black. "Control yourself," she hissed. "You are a huntress of the royal line." But the memory of that single drop of human blood, its scent, its color, kept intruding into her thoughts. She had never encountered anything like it before. Human blood carried something unfamiliar, something that stirred ancient memories she couldn't quite grasp. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. High Commander Da was requesting entry. Nari quickly composed herself, willing her scales to return to their normal silver-blue shade before opening the door. "Are you ill, Huntress?" Da asked, his concern evident. "No, Commander. A momentary weakness. It has passed." Day studied her face. "In 300 years, I have never seen you retreat from anything. What happened in there?" Nari turned away. I'm not certain. The human's blood triggered something unexpected. A threat response. No, she hesitated. The opposite. An attraction. A pull I cannot explain. Day's expression darkened. "This is troubling. The Council selected you for this mission because of your legendary control. If humans affect our biology in unexpected ways, we must reconsider this alliance." "No," Nari said, more forcefully than intended. "I mean, one reaction is not enough to abandon months of diplomatic work. I will adapt. Study this response." Day looked unconvinced but nodded. "The diplomatic meetings begin tomorrow. Will you attend?" "Of course. I am fine now." After Day left, Nari went to her private terminal and requested access to all available human biological data. If this strange reaction was going to continue, she needed to understand it. Hours later, surrounded by biological models and chemical analyses, she sat back in shock. Human blood contained compounds that were completely unique in galactic biology. Elements that seemed to interact with Solarian physiology in ways their scientists had never predicted. "Computer, search historical archives for any mention of similar reactions between Solarians and other species." The computer hummed softly. No exact matches found. However, there is a restricted file in the ancestral archives that may contain relevant information. Nari frowned. Restricted? By whose authority? The Ancient Council, over 3,000 years ago. This was unusual. Few files were restricted that far back in their history. Access the file. Authorization. Royal Huntress. Bloodline verification. The computer scanned her hand, confirming her genetic heritage before displaying the ancient text. As she read, Nari's eyes widened. According to the records, before Solarians became the apex predators they were now, they had once shared their homeworld with another intelligent species, one whose biochemistry bore striking similarities to humans. These beings were not prey but partners in a complex ecosystem. The ancient text suggested a symbiotic relationship that had been deliberately erased from modern Solarian history when the warrior castes took control. "Impossible," she whispered, though the evidence was before her. Her reaction to June's blood wasn't an anomaly. It was a biological memory, buried deep in Solarian genetics. The next morning, Nari entered the diplomatic chamber with new resolve. Her research had given her context for her reactions, but not control over them. As June entered with his team, she felt that same pull, that same inexplicable attraction. She watched him during the negotiations, studying his movements, the way he spoke, how his hands gestured to emphasize points. He was smaller than any Solarian, less physically imposing, yet there was something about him that commanded attention. June caught her staring more than once. Each time, she quickly looked away, pretending to study her notes. But she could tell he was growing increasingly concerned by her attention. During a break in the talks, he approached her directly. "Huntress Nari," he said politely, "have I done something to offend you?" Up close, his scent was even more distracting. Nari forced herself to maintain eye contact. "No offense has been given, Commander Park." "Then why do you watch me with such?" He searched for the right word, intensity. "Your species interests me," she replied carefully. "Enough to make you leave the room yesterday." Nari's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of embarrassment. "That was unexpected. Your blood has an unusual scent to Solarians." "Is it offensive?" he asked. "No, the opposite, in fact." She hadn't meant to be so direct, but something about him made her want to speak honestly. Before June could respond, another Solarian approached. Ban, the Empire's security minister and a longtime rival of Nari's. His scales were a deep green, and his eyes narrowed as he looked between her and the human. "Royal Huntress, Ban said smoothly. I didn't expect to find you conversing privately with our guests. Minister Ban, Nari acknowledged coldly. Commander Park had questions about yesterday's ceremony. Ban's eyes flicked to June. I hope our Huntress has composed herself today. Her behavior yesterday was most unusual. June glanced between them, clearly sensing the tension. No harm was done. Cultural misunderstandings are common in first contacts. Indeed, Ban's smile didn't reach his eyes, though a royal Huntress should be beyond such weaknesses. After Ban walked away, Jum turned to Nari. Not a friend of yours, I take it. Ban believes Xilarians should remain isolated. He sees connections with other species as contamination. And what do you believe? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her personal beliefs in a long time. As royal Huntress, she was expected to embody Xilarian traditions, not question them. I believe, she began slowly, that isolation leads to stagnation. My research suggests that Xilarians once had relationships with other species that made us stronger, not weaker. June studied her face. You've been researching us. Yes, because of your reaction to my blood. Neri nodded, uncomfortable with her own honesty. There are things about our own history that may have been altered in the telling. June's expression softened with interest. That happens in human history too. Their conversation was interrupted as the diplomatic session resumed. As Neri took her seat, she noticed Ban watching her, his expression calculating. He had witnessed their conversation, and she knew him well enough to recognize the dangerous ambition in his eyes. Ban had always wanted her position, her influence with the High Command. Now he had seen her weakness, her inexplicable reaction to humans, and she knew he would use it against her. The question was when, not if. As the negotiations continued, Nari realized she was caught between two powerful forces. The strange, compelling attraction she felt toward June, and the growing political threat from Ban. Both could destroy her in very different ways. And somewhere in the space between those dangers lay secrets about her own species that someone had tried very hard to erase. June couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. 3 days into the diplomatic mission, he had grown accustomed to the Xilarian ship, but something felt different tonight. The corridor to his guest quarters seemed darker, the shadows deeper. He stopped walking and listened. The faint hum of the ship's engines was the only sound, yet he was certain someone was there. I know you're following me, he said to the empty hallway. Silence answered him. Then, a slight movement in the shadows. Neri stepped into view, her silver-blue scales catching the dim light. Your senses are sharp for a human, she said. June's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. How long have you been following me? 3 nights now. She showed no embarrassment at being caught. You take the same path each evening, though you vary your timing. Is this how Xilarians typically treat diplomatic guests? By stalking them? Nari moved closer. Up close, he could see the violet flecks in her eyes, the subtle shift of color across her scales as she breathed. This is not official Xilarian protocol, she admitted. This is personal. The word hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. June thought of their brief conversations over the past few days, how she seemed both drawn to him and determined to keep her distance. Then perhaps we should speak somewhere more private than a hallway, he suggested. Nari nodded. The observation garden is empty at this hour. They walked in silence to a large chamber filled with plants from various worlds. The ceiling was transparent, showing the stars beyond. Water trickled somewhere in the artificial landscape, creating a peaceful backdrop to their tense conversation. Why are you following me? June asked when they were alone. Neri paced like a caged animal, her usual grace now reflecting an inner turmoil. I've been trying to understand what is happening to me. Since that first day when I smelled your blood, I haven't been able to think clearly. You said my blood has an unusual scent. More than unusual. She struggled for words, awakening something in me. Something forgotten. June frowned. Is this happening to other Xilarians too? No, at least none have admitted it. She stopped pacing and faced him directly. I've been researching. There are sealed records in our ancient archives about a species similar to humans. A species my ancestors had a complex relationship with. What kind of relationship? That information was deliberately erased. Her voice hardened. Someone in our past tried to hide the fact that Xilarians weren't always solitary hunters. We once had partners, possibly even mates, from another species. June absorbed this, understanding the implications. And you think humans somehow remind your biology of this lost connection? Yes, your blood carries compounds that trigger responses in me, not predatory responses, but something else, something that makes me want to be near you. The admission clearly cost her pride. June could see the conflict in her eyes, the disciplined huntress fighting against feelings she didn't understand. Does anyone else know about this research? He asked. Ban suspects something. He's been watching me, looking for weakness. The security minister. He seemed unfriendly. Nari's expression darkened. Ban has opposed this alliance from the beginning. He believes in Xilarian superiority and isolation. If he learns of my reaction to humans, he'll use it to claim your species is a biological threat. A sound behind them cut through their conversation, the soft click of claws on stone. Nari spun toward it, moving with incredible speed. We're not alone, she hissed. Before June could respond, 3 Xilarians emerged from behind the garden's plants. He recognized Van in the lead, flanked by 2 larger Xilarians wearing the insignia of Imperial Guards. What a touching scene, Van said, his scales a smug shade of green gold. The royal huntress and her human pet, sharing secrets in the dark. Nari's hand moved to the blade at her side. This is a private conversation, Minister. Nothing is private when it concerns Imperial security. Van circled them slowly. I've been observing your strange behavior, Huntress. Your obsession with this human goes beyond diplomatic interest. You know nothing of my interests. Van smiled coldly. I know you've accessed restricted archives. I know you've been researching human biology. And now I find you alone with one, sharing what appears to be sensitive information. Minister Ben, June started, there's been a misunderstanding. Silence, human. Ben snapped. Your kind has somehow corrupted our royal huntress. Perhaps it's a deliberate attack on our biology. Nari stepped forward, her posture shifting to something more dangerous. Be careful with your accusations, Ban. They border on treason. Treason, Ban laughed. I'm protecting our empire from contamination. He gestured to his guards. Arrest the human for questioning. The royal huntress will face the high command to explain her behavior. The guards moved forward, but Nari was faster. Her blade flashed in the starlight as she drew it. You have no authority to give such orders, she said, her voice deadly calm. Stand aside, Huntress, one guard said, though he hesitated at the sight of her weapon. June realized the situation was spiraling toward violence. This isn't necessary. Van cut him off with a gesture. Take them both. What happened next was too fast for June to follow completely. Nari moved like liquid lightning, her blade a silver arc, as she knocked aside the first guard's weapon. The second guard rushed her from behind, but June reacted instinctively, using the unarmed combat training all Earth diplomats received. He swept the guard's legs, sending the surprised Xilarian crashing into a display of alien flowers. Van drew his own weapon, firing a pulse of energy that Nari deflected with her blade. You've just assured your own disgrace, Van snarled at her, attacking Imperial guards to protect a human. They attacked first, Nari countered, circling to put herself between Van and June. And under whose orders? You have no authority in diplomatic matters. Van fired again, and this time the energy pulse grazed June's arm. Pain seared through him as he fell back, clutching the wound. Blood seeped between his fingers. The effect on Nari was immediate and shocking. The scent of human blood hit her like a physical force. Her pupils dilated fully, and her scales flushed crimson. She turned toward Ban with a look of pure, predatory focus. What had been graceful combat transformed into something else, something primal and terrifying. She moved with impossible speed, disarming Ban before he could fire again. Her blade pressed against his throat as she forced him to his knees. "You've made your last mistake," she whispered, her voice altered by her biological response. "Nary, don't," June called out, pressing his hand against his bleeding arm. "That's what he wants. To prove humans change your behavior." His words penetrated her blood-induced haze. With visible effort, she pulled back from the killing stroke, though she kept Ban pinned. "You're right," she said, her breathing ragged. "He will face justice properly." The garden's entrance slid open, and High Commander Dai entered with more guards, drawn by the commotion. "What is happening here?" he demanded, taking in the scene. Ban immediately began. "Commander, the Royal Huntress has been compromised by your unauthorized attempt to interfere with diplomatic negotiations." Nari cut in, her voice steady despite the crimson still coloring her scales. "Minister Ban attacked a diplomatic guest and ordered guards to arrest us without proper authority." Day's gaze shifted to June's bleeding arm, then back to Nari's face. His eyes narrowed as he noted her dilated pupils and flushed scales. "Take Minister Ban to holding," he ordered the guards. "I will hear all accounts of this incident and get medical attention for Commander Park." As the guards led Ban away, he called back, "Look at her reaction to his blood, Commander. Humans are changing her. They're a threat to everything we are." Day's expression remained unreadable as he studied Nari, who was visibly struggling to control her reaction to June's blood. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "they are not changing us, but reminding us of what we once were." He turned to June. "It seems, Commander Park, that our alliance discussions have become considerably more complicated." The news spread through the Xelarian ship like wildfire. Whispers filled every corridor about the Royal Huntress and her strange reaction to human blood. Some told the story with disgust, others with fascination. By morning, the entire crew knew of the confrontation in the garden. June sat in the medical bay as a Xelarian doctor treated his arm wound. The doctor worked in silence, occasionally glancing at him with undisguised curiosity. "Does my blood affect you too?" June finally asked. The doctor paused, then shook his head. "No, but I lack the Royal Huntress's bloodline. The old families react differently." "The old families. Those who trace their lineage to before the Great Hunt." The doctor finished bandaging June's arm. "That's all I should say. Politics is dangerous these days." When June returned to his quarters, he found Minji waiting for him, her expression tense. "What happened?" she demanded. "The Xelarians are in an uproar." June explained the confrontation with Ban and Neri's reaction to his blood. Minji listened with growing concern. "This could end our mission," she said when he finished. "If human blood triggers their hunting instincts." "It's not hunting," June interrupted. "That's what's so strange. Neri says it's something else, something from their past. And now the whole ship is talking about it." "Commander Da has called an emergency meeting of their High Council," Minji informed him. "Our team is invited to attend." June nodded. "We need to understand what's happening. This isn't just about a trade agreement anymore." The High Council chamber was massive, with tiered seating surrounding a central speaking area. June and his team were given seats near Commander Da, while across the chamber, Minister Ban sat with a group of stern-faced Xelarians who kept glaring in their direction. Neri entered last, her head held high despite the murmurs that followed her. She wore formal armor, the insignia of the Royal Huntress displayed prominently. She took her place beside Da without looking at June, though he could sense her awareness of him. Day opened the session. "We face an unprecedented situation. The Royal Huntress has experienced an unusual biological response to human blood. Minister Ban claims this represents a threat to Xelarian identity, Before we hear arguments, Dr. Sue will present her findings. An older female Xylarian approached the center of the chamber. I have analyzed human blood samples provided by Commander Park and compared them to our ancient biological archives. Holographic displays appeared around the room, showing complex molecular structures. Human blood contains compounds remarkably similar to those found in the Vora species. Murmurs erupted around the chamber. Van stood up. The Vora are myth, stories to frighten children. The Vora were real, Dr. Sue countered firmly. Their existence was deliberately erased from our historical records, but not from our scientific archives. They were companion species to ancient Xylarians. Companions? Someone called out. You mean prey? No, Dr. Sue said. Genetic evidence suggests a symbiotic relationship. The Vora weren't prey, but partners. The chamber erupted in angry shouts. Dag called for order, but the Xylarians were too agitated. June watched as divisions formed before his eyes. Some Xylarians looked outraged, others intrigued, and many simply confused. Van seized the moment of chaos. See how this information divides us. Humans carry the blood memory of a species that threatens our identity as hunters. They would turn us from predators to pets. That's not true, Nari said, her voice cutting through the noise. She stepped into the center of the chamber. I've experienced this reaction firsthand. It doesn't weaken me. It awakens something our ancestors deliberately buried. Because it was shameful, Van shouted. Because it was powerful, Nari countered. So powerful it threatened those who wanted absolute control over our society. She turned to address the entire chamber. The archives show that after the Great Hunt, when the warrior caste took control of our civilization, they systematically eliminated the Vora and erased our shared history. They feared the bond our species had developed. What bond? Dai asked quietly. Nari hesitated, then spoke clearly. A mating bond. The chemical markers in human blood are almost identical to Vora mating pheromones. That's why I reacted so strongly, not with hunting instinct, but with attraction. The chamber fell completely silent. June felt every Xylarian eye turn toward him, then back to Nari. Van broke the silence with a laugh. You suggest that humans are potential mates for Xylarians. This is absurd. Disgusting. Is it? Dr. Sue interjected. Our genetic research suggests that Xylarians once interbred with Vora. Those bloodlines are still evident in certain families. The royal families, Nari added. My family. That's why I react more strongly than others. June suddenly understood why this was so politically explosive. If Nari was right, the elite Xylarian families, including hers, carried the genetic memory of interspecies bonding. It contradicted everything modern Xylarian society believed about their predatory purity. Van pointed at June accusingly. This human has corrupted our royal Huntress. He should be removed from our ship immediately. Day raised his hand for silence. Commander Park, what does Earth make of this situation? All eyes turned to June as he stood. Earth came seeking a trade alliance. We didn't expect to uncover lost history, but perhaps this discovery is more valuable than any trade agreement. He looked directly at Nari. Humans value knowledge and connection. If our biology resonates with yours because of your ancient past, we see that as fascinating, not threatening. Easy for you to say, Van sneered. Your species isn't being asked to change its identity. Change it, June questioned, or remember it completely. From what I understand, Xylarians were once both hunters and partners. Why can't you be both again? A low murmur spread through the chamber as Xylarians considered his words. June could see the division growing clearer. Van and his traditionalists on one side, looking disgusted, others looking thoughtful or even excited by the possibilities. Day stood. This council needs time to process this information. We will recess for 1 day while we consider the implications. He looked at June. The human delegation will remain under protection. No one is to approach them without authorization. As the council members filed out, many still arguing heatedly, Neri finally looked at June. Her expression was a complex mixture of emotions, pride, worry, and something deeper he couldn't name. Ban passed close to them, his scales a dark, angry green. "This isn't over, human," he hissed. "Some traditions are worth killing to protect." Later, in a secure meeting room, June's team gathered with Nari and Commander Dai. "Ban is gathering support among the traditionalist factions," Dai informed them. "Many fear what these revelations mean for our society." "Will they try to stop the alliance?" Minji asked. "They may try to stop more than that," Neri said grimly. "The idea that Solarians once mated with another species threatens thousands of years of belief in our genetic superiority." "Can you prove what's in the archives?" Jun asked. Dr. Su, who had joined them, nodded. "The genetic evidence is clear, but many don't want to see it." "We stand at a crossroads," Dai said. "For centuries, we've defined ourselves solely as hunters, predators. Now we must decide if we're willing to remember we were once more than that." "And if you don't?" Jun asked. Neri met his eyes. "Then we lose something precious twice. Once in our past, and once in our future." Dai's communication device chimed. His expression darkened as he read the message. "What is it?" Nari asked. "Ban has called for a traditional challenge of truth," Dai said grimly. "He wants to settle this in the ancient way." "A fight to the death," Nari explained, seeing Jun's confusion. "Between Ban and you. A fight to the death." Jun stared at Nari in disbelief. "That's not how humans settle diplomatic disagreements." "It's not how modern Solarians do either," Dai said, his scales darkening with concern. "But Ban has invoked ancient law. He claims that since this matter affects the very essence of Solarian identity, it should be settled through the challenge of truth." "Can you refuse?" Minji asked, her hand moving instinctively to the weapon she wasn't permitted to carry on the Solarian ship. "Refusal would be seen as an admission that humans are too weak to stand for their beliefs," Nari explained. "It would give Ban exactly what he wants, proof that our species shouldn't mix." Jun paced the room, thinking rapidly. "What if you fought in my place? You're the one he really wants to discredit." "I offered," Nari said. Ban refused. "He claims my judgment is compromised by my reaction to your blood." "This is insane," Dr. Jin muttered. "We came to negotiate trade routes, not fight duels." Commander Dai's expression was grave. "I've delayed my response to Ban's challenge, but I cannot refuse it outright without risking civil conflict. The traditionalists are using this to rally support against any alliance with humans." "There must be another way," Jun said. Nari stepped closer to him, her voice low. "There is, but it requires courage." Later that night, Jun met Nari in a small training room deep in the ship. She had changed from her formal armor into lighter training gear that revealed more of her scaled skin. "Ban is a skilled fighter," she said without preamble. "He's killed 17 challengers over his career." "Not encouraging," Jun replied. "But he has weaknesses." She drew her training blade. "His pride makes him predictable, and he doesn't understand humans." For the next 3 hours, she worked with Jun, teaching him Solarian fighting techniques. Though he had basic combat training, the difference in strength and speed between their species was obvious. A Solarian child could overpower a human adult. "I can't beat him through strength," Jun said, breathing hard after being thrown to the mat for the 20th time. "No," Nari agreed. "But there's something else you can use." She helped him up, her hand lingering on his. "My reaction to your blood isn't unique. All Solarians carry that ancient memory in their genetics, though most aren't as sensitive to it as I am." Jun looked at her. "You're suggesting I use my blood as a weapon." "As a distraction," she corrected. "Ban will react to it, even if less strongly than I do. In that moment of biological confusion, you might find your opportunity." The day of the challenge arrived quickly. The combat arena was an ancient part of the ship, rarely used in modern times. Hundreds of Xilarians filled the viewing galleries, their scales a rainbow of colors reflecting their various emotions. Ban entered first, wearing traditional hunting armor. He carried a ceremonial blade similar to Nari's but larger, its edge glinting wickedly in the arena lights. When June entered, a murmur ran through the crowd. He wore a modified version of his Earth uniform, reinforced in key areas by Nari's design. At his side hung a smaller blade, the gift he had received on his first day aboard. High Commander Day stood between them. This challenge of truth will determine the path of our people. Ban challenges the human alliance based on our ancient traditions. Commander Park defends it based on new understanding. He looked at each of them. Fight with honor. Fight for truth. Day stepped back, and Ban immediately advanced, his movements fluid and predatory. Your human muscles will tear like wet paper, Ban hissed. June didn't waste breath responding. He focused on Ban's movements, remembering Nari's lessons. Ban was faster, stronger, but also overconfident. The first attack came in a blur. Ban's blade sliced through the air, where June had been standing a split second earlier. June dodged as Nari had taught him, not trying to match speed, but predicting the pattern. For several minutes, June did nothing but evade, studying Ban's style. The Xilarian grew increasingly frustrated, his attacks becoming more aggressive but less precise. Stand and fight, Ban snarled. Why? June replied calmly. You said it yourself. I'm just a weak human. The taunt worked. Ban lunged forward in a powerful but slightly uncontrolled attack. June sidestepped, but not quite fast enough. The blade caught his arm, opening a shallow cut. Blood welled up, bright red against his skin. The effect on Ban was subtle but immediate. His nostrils flared, his pupils dilated slightly. For just a second, his attack rhythm faltered. In that moment, Jun moved forward instead of back, inside Ban's guard as Nari had shown him. He pressed his bleeding arm against Ban's face, smearing blood across the Xilarian's sensitive smell receptors. Ban recoiled in shock, his scales flushing with involuntary color. The crowd gasped as the feared security minister stumbled backward, clearly disoriented by the blood contact. See what happens, June called out, loud enough for all to hear. This isn't weakness, it's memory. Your bodies remember what your histories try to erase. Ban roared in rage and charged forward. But his movements were uncoordinated. The scent of human blood had triggered the same response in him that Nari had experienced, not as strongly, but enough to affect his legendary control. June used Ban's momentum against him, stepping aside at the last moment and tripping the larger fighter. Ban crashed to the ground, his blade skittering away. Before he could recover, Jun placed his own blade against Ban's throat, not pressing, but present. Kill me then, Ban growled. Prove you're the predator. Jun shook his head. That's not why I'm here. He stepped back and dropped his weapon. I don't want to kill you. I want to remind you. He held out his bleeding arm for all to see. Your ancestors weren't just hunters. They were partners too. Being both doesn't make you weaker, it makes you whole. Ban climbed to his feet, confusion and anger warring on his face. You refuse to complete the challenge. I refuse to kill needlessly, Jun said. Isn't that what partners do? Find better solutions than death. A murmur ran through the crowd. Dai stepped forward. The human has won by forcing his opponent to yield, yet chooses mercy instead of death. The challenge is complete. No, Ban shouted. This proves nothing. The human is simply too weak to finish. His words cut off as Neri stepped into the arena, her scales a brilliant silver blue. It proves everything, Ban. Look at yourself. Your scales show the truth your words deny. Ban's scales had indeed changed color. The same crimson flush that had affected Nari when she first smelled human blood. You feel it too, she said, addressing not just Ban, but all the watching Xilarians. That pull, That recognition. Not prey, not predator, but something else. Something we've been missing for thousands of years. She walked to June's side. Our ancestors tried to erase this part of our history because they feared it would weaken us as hunters. But look at what we've become. Isolated, seeing every other species as either threat or prey. What if there's another way? The arena was silent as her words sank in. Even Ban seemed at a loss for response. Commander Day finally broke the silence. The challenge of truth has shown us truth indeed, but not the one Ban expected. He looked around the arena. For too long, we've defined strength only through the hunt. Perhaps it's time to remember that our ancestors found strength in connection too. 3 days later, Jum stood in the docking bay beside Neri as the Earth delegation prepared to depart. Their mission had been a success beyond anyone's expectations, not just a trade agreement, but the beginning of a cultural exchange that would explore the ancient connections between their species. What will happen to Ban? Jun asked. He's been assigned to a deep space outpost, Neri said with a slight smile. Far from politics. But I suspect even he will come to terms with these changes eventually. The evidence is literally in his blood. And you? Jun asked. Will you come to Earth as we discussed? Neri's scales shimmered with a new color. One Jun had learned indicated happiness. Yes, as the first Silurian cultural ambassador. There's much for both our peoples to learn. She reached out, touching the healing cut on his arm. Our ancestors found each other once before. Perhaps they always meant for us to find each other again. As June boarded the shuttle, he looked back at Neri. The royal Huntress stood tall among her people, no longer fighting her reaction to humans, but embracing it. A living bridge between their species, shared past and future. The hunt had evolved once more.